Finally, a House investigation into the origins of COVID has concluded that the virus may have been part of a Chinese biological weapons research program when it was accidentally released from a Wuhan lab. China expert Gordon Chang joins us now to discuss the findings and how he says, even more critically here, Chinese leaders did not stop the transmission of the virus out of China once the COVID leak was discovered. The House GOP came out with a report discussing possible origins of COVID. What do you know to be true at this point in time?
Well, we don't have 100% visibility into the origins of SARS-CoV-2, the pathogen that causes this disease. But we do know that the theory that the science community favors, which is zoonotic transfer, they've not been able to document the links after all these years. They say this started in a bat in southern China, Yunnan province probably, transmitted to an intermediary mammal, and then jumped to humans. Well, no one's been able to document those links, but we do have substantial evidence that there was a leak of this from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. But Allison, we do know something 100%. And that is that however this disease started, and I think that it was a lab leak from a biological weapons facility, but however this disease started, we know 100% that Chinese leader Xi Jinping decided to deliberately spread this disease beyond China's borders. For critical weeks in December 2019 and January 2020, they lied about transmissibility. They knew this disease was highly contagious human to human, but they told the world it was not. And then when they started locking down their own country, and I know lockdowns are controversial, but by locking down their own country, they were telling the world they thought this was an effective way to stop disease. So while they were locking down their own country, they were pressuring other countries, including the US, not to impose travel restrictions and quarantines on arrivals. Those arrivals that took a disease that should have been confined to the central part of China, and they spread it to the world. That's 6.6 million people who have died from this disease outside China, including 1,086,000 Americans. Those are people who should never have contracted the disease in the first place. 100%. They took this disease and they turned it into a biological weapon if it didn't start out life as one.
Who knew at that point in time to allow travel? Who knew?
The Chinese leadership knew. The Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention, they knew. And they were just lying. It was clear. And we Americans should have known better, but we relied on the assurances given by China and given to the World Health Organization, which helped propagate China's position, which WHO doctors knew was not true. So Maria von Kerkhove, who was a senior scientist at the WHO, she was a coronavirus expert. She knew SARS. She knew this was highly transmissible from the get-go. And yet the senior political leadership at the WHO, in a tweet, they took China's position and they told the world, don't worry, this is not contagious. And there was a January 9th statement from the WHO. They had to know that what they were telling the world was untrue and was dangerous. We should have known better, but there are a lot of people who just took the words of Chinese scientists at face value.
But do you think that there were people in the United States who knew, who didn't speak out?
There probably were. Is an idiot, so they must have known. But it was a time when the Trump administration was trying to repair relations with China, so that didn't help. But anyone who was paying attention to this in December 2019 knew that there was a highly contagious disease. We didn't know what was going on, but you could tell from the scattered reports that people were dying. This was human-to-human transmissible. So I think the world should have been a lot smarter and ignored the assurances from China and ignored the assurances through the World Health Organization.
Okay, this is a kind of a loaded question, but we're in this tense situation with China right now? We are inextricably linked financially, politically. How do we move forward at this point? And who makes those decisions?
Well, the one thing that I believe that we must do is to cut our relations with China. And I know that that's extreme, but let's remember that China uses every point of contact with the United States to bring down our government. And we are now being overwhelmed. Our FBI is overwhelmed, law enforcement's overwhelmed, our universities, our NGOs, our state governments are all overwhelmed. And if we want to keep our country, we're going to have to sever those links, be confident that we can manage our relations with China. Now, I know that that is an extreme position, but what I'm saying is that this is necessary because we're being attacked. We're not defending ourselves. The person who could do something about this, by the way, is 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue Northwest, Washington, D.C. He could use his powers under the International Emergency Economic Powers in 1977 to cut a lot of those links. And he could stop being an obstruction to those who do want to sever ties with China.
What can you say to those companies who are steadfastly against breaking deep economic relations?
Yeah, I can understand they want to make a buck, but they will be held with the same contempt that IBM is being held for its relations with the Third Reich when they should have known better. But really, ultimately, this is not up to companies to determine the national security policy of the US and to implement it. That job is the person I just described. President Biden has that responsibility to defend the United States. His most important constitutional duty is to protect us from foreign attack. And although he's done some things which I think are good, he's failed to act with the vigor that is necessary, and he's failed to act with the speed that is necessary. So this is a political decision that must be made. Once the political decisions are made, then companies have to follow.
Lastly, will we see anything happen in Taiwan? And if so, when?
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion in Washington, D.C. about a deadline that China's imposed on attacking Taiwan. I don't know if there's a deadline, but we have to be concerned that the Chinese political system right now could lash out. You've got to remember that in the last 3 or 4 days, as the situation in China deteriorated internally, that Chinese in Arunachal Pradesh, in India, in the line of actual control, actually moved into Indian-controlled territory. So that is China lashing out. And it could be India again, or it could be the Philippines, or Japan, or Taiwan, or it could be even the United States. But the point is that Xi Jinping, I think, sees that he needs a foreign enemy. So it could be any of those intended victims that China has. But we got to be prepared. We have a political establishment and we have a Pentagon, both civilian officials like Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, plus the 3 and 4 stars that don't have the required sense of urgency. You can even say they have no sense of urgency. So we are, although we're a far stronger society than China right now, especially a China that is falling apart, we nonetheless can be taken by surprise because we're not defending ourselves.
Well, thank you so much, Gordon, for joining us this evening and sharing your knowledge and insight. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Allison.
Take care.